Thank you for helping us over the last 18 years to build both of these campuses, to go from serving under 100 children to almost 1,000 today. And I'm pleased to be able to tell you that despite that growth, over 90% of our students who are predominantly low-income African-American students go on to graduate from a traditional high school in 4 years. Thank you for equipping us to have power behind our purpose, and our purpose is really threefold. Firstly, by holding out the word of life to introduce children and families to their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. To make sure that any child or parent or family or vendor who interacts with this ministry, this school, knows who Jesus is, what he has done, and that he is alive and that he brings hope. Secondly, our purpose is to deliver great education, world-class education to kids in a space where it's hard to find. And thirdly, to lead the way in education reform in our city, especially in the private sector, but really throughout the city. And it is such a blessing to be in this space and to be able to do those three things. And it's in large part because people like you have come alongside us and said, this must be done. I want to take a moment to thank some really critical people. First of all, my colleagues on the church side, the pastors and the staff, and the principals and deans, directors, teachers, support staff who come in every day and just bring game and give it their all to make sure that kids just receive excellence. If you're on staff in the church or the school, could you please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Secondly, we're nearing the end of what's been a really intense campaign. We have a campaign cabinet comprised of 10 men and women who have just said, we're all in and we're going to make this happen. Could all 10 of the cabinet members please stand? Thank you so much for your hard work. This is a little bit unusual, but there's a gentleman here tonight who is a mentor to me, who actually runs some competing schools. He runs Milwaukee College Prep, which this year is in their 20th year. They're now serving 2,000 students at an incredibly high level. I believe Rob Rao is in the room. We owe him a debt of gratitude. Rob, could you stand? I think he's at the back. There he is. Thank you, Rob. Love those guys and the work that they're doing. You know, in the last couple weeks, 2 stories broke that provide some really significant insight into the work that you are so generously participating in. The first was the release of the forward exam data, that's the state test, for the city's 80/80 schools. An 80/80 school, one of which is St. Marcus. The student body is 80% low income and 80% African American. There are 96 80/80 schools serving 32,000 children in our city. And whereas the statewide average for proficiency is 46%, amongst those 80/80 schools, it is a shockingly low 9%. And within those 96 80/80 schools, unbelievably, in 2017, there are 6 schools with 0% proficiency. Not a single child passed the exam. There's 12 more with less than 2% that can read. That's like this room has just over 400 people in it. It means 8 of you would be proficient in reading. Can you imagine that that's the choice you have for where your child goes to school? The second story, directly related to the first, was the release of the BBC documentary titled Murder in Milwaukee, which took an hour-long look at the causes and, to a lesser degree, the impact of the skyrocketing homicide rate in our city. And the documentary focused specifically on a homicide that took place less than 3 blocks from here, resulting in the death of Antonio Ewing, which took place on North Hubbard Street, directly in between our 2 campuses. That killing last summer was within a block of the homes of 4 of our staff members and countless numbers of students and their families. The victim of that homicide, Antonio, was an uncle of a St. Marcus student, a current student. So with those 2 sort of data points and facts in mind, I want to ask you now, in a slightly risky fashion, to take a deep dive with me for just a few minutes into the realities of life for those of us who have moved in and for the residents who live here on the north and northwest side of the city. See what the realities are, because over the last couple of decades we have failed as a community to give hope and purpose and an education to so many children. The documentary starts by providing an overview of the city's problems. Discouraged? Hopeless? Don't be. Don't be. You know, in my experience, there are plenty of discouraged and defeated people in our community who are hopeless. And what I want to submit to you tonight, that's one of the reasons why this place is so unique, is because we are not willing to be hopeless. Yes, we're willing to look at these kind of realities, to look at the brutal truth, but we will not become hopeless. Instead, we will fight like crazy to overcome it. You know, there's a couple of specific perspectives in this documentary that I find fascinating. The first comes from the Lost Boys, who are perceptive enough to know that the fact that they were raised without a daddy makes it so much harder for them to know what it means to be a productive, manly, contributing member to society. And there is no doubt, because we see it all the time, when boys and girls grow up without daddies, the impact is enormous. That being said, if you are a single mom, and most of the children that attend our school, the majority, a heavy majority, are in single-family homes, many don't have an active dad in their life. If you're that single parent and you get up in the morning and you take your, life is hard enough already. You're a low-income family just struggling to get by. You get up in the morning and you take your child to one of these crazy schools where 9% of the kids can read, or 4% or 2%. From the minute those children get on the bus, where they are fighting just to survive, you know that that child has very little chance of finding their purpose. The flip side of that is that when you take that same single parent and that same child and you surround them with a school and a community that will love them and that will hold them to high expectations and will hold them to high standards and will teach them that they have value and they have purpose, amazing things happen. And I can introduce you to single mom after single mom after single mom after the occasional single dad whose life and whose kid's life has been transformed because they encountered St. Marcus or they encountered Milwaukee College Prep. The second perspective that I find interesting is that of the police officer who expresses absolute hopelessness of a solution. You know, I don't know that man. I certainly don't know his faith. I'm pretty sure that if I had his job, I would be similarly hopeless. But we, as a community of believers, defy that hopelessness on two grounds. The first one is the God we serve. And when I read the Holy Scriptures, when I read the Bible, I see and hear about a God who repeatedly, again and again, redeemed impossible situations. When I look at my life, you know, people say I clean up pretty well. But if you knew the brokenness that was in me and the way that our gracious God has kind of put me back together and given me a purpose, you would be amazed. And when I look at our kiddos, you know, these 5th and 6th graders walk in our doors, and I look at some of them and I'm like, I do not know how we get this child from where they are today to where they need to be in order to live with a purpose. And yet again and again, I see God doing this crazy work of putting people back together. I see it in our school. You know, Paul wrote to the Ephesians and he said, our God is able to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine. That's a biblical truth. And when I started out 16 years ago, all I asked was, Lord, 300 kids, and let it be a great school. And the fact that today we're 930, growing towards 1,000, and that lives are being radically transformed, that is simply because God can do immeasurably more than all we could ask or imagine. We defy hopelessness, first of all, because of who God is, and secondly, because we now know what to do. You know, 20 years ago, before MCP, before St. Marcus did a turnaround, before there was Carmen, I'm not sure we knew what to do with this. But we've had 20 years of learning lessons, and what we know is that when caring, passionate adults come together and make a commitment to educate kids without making excuses, with the best interests of the kids in mind, when they build character and they teach rigorously, children that everybody else are willing to write off thrive. We know that. So that's what we do. We surround children and families with love, with rigor, with support, with encouragement, and we see them fly. So I want to just say to you, thank you for going deep and looking at what is a crazy tough reality for the children and families who walk in and out of this door every day. Thank you for going there with me. And now know that in part because of what's happening here tonight, I am far from hopeless. Quite the opposite, I'm optimistic. I am deeply encouraged by my colleagues who come in here on a daily basis and live out our core values. Our core values are Christ first, biblical discipleship, sacrificial love, where we give and give of ourselves until it hurts, and then radical expectations of each other and of kids. My colleagues encourage me because they do that every day. I'm encouraged by our 930 scholars, some of whom are facing extreme challenges, and yet they come back and they work hard and they apply themselves. I'm encouraged by our alumni, who now that I've been at this 16 years, I get to see them going on, and they're becoming incredible young men and women, educators, pastors, architects, soldiers, mechanics, businessmen and businesswomen. Beyond these walls, I'm encouraged by the movement in our city. Not only other great schools, some of which I've mentioned, but the Center for Urban Teaching, raising up a legion of young faith-based teachers to be great educators. Schools That Can Milwaukee, coming alongside schools and showing them what is possible. PAVE, working with boards and providing resources to schools to be excellent. I'm excited that sometimes with our help, many of our school families, our parents, are getting connected with great community organizations. Places like WIBIC and ACTS Housing, the Joseph Project, and the Milwaukee Jobs Work. And when our parents, oftentimes who start out as young, sort of struggling single-parent families, get introduced to these organizations and get given a vision and a purpose, they start to fly, and we see them go from poverty to stability to prosperity. That encourages me immensely. Finally, I'm encouraged by you, men and women from all walks of life, from all parts of this city, some of you from across the country, some of you who have walked with us, and we're not gonna fix this tomorrow, but we're gonna fix this. And you've walked with us for 15, 16 years, some of you, and my hope and prayer is that we will continue to build an army of people who are radically committed so that every child in this city gets the blessing of an access to a great education so that they can live with purpose.